Yeah, sure. Do like a mic test real quick.
Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Mic check. Well, test 1 2. Yeah, that's pretty much live. Okay.
Sorry. It's off. That was earlier from like 5 minutes ago. Oh, it was a 30-second delay. I see.
Throw it right there, because we'll put it.
Oh no, I'm back and forth here, so I'm not sure if it's running. Sister.
Hey, Narissa?
Yes.
I just texted you.
Okay.
There's 5 questions.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Yep. Okay.
So if you wanted to take your seats here.
And for the rest of you all who have joined us, first of all, thank you for being here. Second of all, I might ask you all to kind of move up, just because we'd like to be able to get you all in the frame. We'll be the back of your heads, but it will still be important. Wherever you feel comfortable. Yeah, yeah. But it'd be great if we could have you all come up a little bit. Thank you so much. And thank you again for being here. Well, so real quick question. If we turn the mics on, they are basically recording, right?
Yeah, it's
So,
podcasting.
okay, so let's not actually turn them on just yet.
I see.
Are we still using the microphone?
You all should be good
Right.
with your live. Yeah. You know, I think we should start straight. But I mean, what I can do is
Just a little bit, so we can see your face.
sure.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. This is very formal, but let's not make it that.
gonna try to make it so it's not like that. Hey, how you doing?
No, we can't shut that off. No. We can pull up the screen when we go live.
No, it's not bad, it's just that we're, well,
Well, when we pull it up, it's less.
Where do you all have to practice?
Yeah.
not bad.
Nothing. Oh, yeah, you decided. Me too. Yeah.
I went straight to class, top class.
Oh, word?
Yeah, we had a show last night. I taught classes for it. And now I'm here.
Wow.
And I rehearsal right after this.
All right. Make sure you take some snacks.
I did have a granola, I was like, what is this?
Yeah, we know that, like, you can't take any performance. What about you? What you do?
What was on the toast?
Very smart. Right. Football, what did you have?
We had oatmeal for breakfast, and we also had lunch actually before.
Oh, okay.
And sandwich, fried chicken sandwich.
It makes sense that the restaurateur is gonna have the best spread. This is up.
Alright.
Welcome, everybody, to today's panel. I'm Cheryl White. I am the coordinator of visitor engagement and exhibitions here at the Arnold Arboretum, and it is my real pleasure to introduce Ash Gordon, and she'll be introducing everyone else. Thank you for coming.
Thanks so much for having us, and for those that are joining in person, this is a really beautiful day, a beautiful space at the Arnold Arboretum, and we are very excited to be here. For those joining online, hello. Thank you for being here as well. I am Ashley Gordon. I'm Artistic and Executive Director of Castle of Our Skins, and along with the Arnold Arboretum and Daniel Callahan, we are putting on a ball, quite literally, here at the Arnold Arboretum in July. It will be a celebration of and for communities of color, understanding the idea if we came together and started from a place of unity, thinking of an origin story, what could we create? So this is a part of a whole series. We have 6 of these before that big day in July 9 to help understand and sort of unpack what intercultural artistic expression could look like, what origins are already operating our understanding and influencing our understandings, and how we can create our own lectures, other sorts of workshops. So a whole slew of things. You can find more online at MassQ, MassQ Ball.com. For those in the live stream, I'll be able to put that in the chat so you can get that link directly. Follow us on social media and be able to engage with not only our project, but obviously the Arnold Arboretum and our amazing, amazing panelists that you will quickly learn all sorts of information about as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Daniel Callahan, who's moderating, and take it away to introduce our panel.
Thank you, Ash. Good afternoon, everyone. All right. I love the call and response. It's good. Lets me know that I'm talking to human beings. Thank you all for being here. There's many different things you could be doing on your Saturday, but we thank you for choosing to be here. Again, as Ash said, I'm Daniel Callahan, a multimedia artist, and one of the folks who are part of this masquerade ball. a little more sort of background on the event. This is actually going to be our second iteration here in Boston. We did one in 2017 at Hibernian Hall in Roxbury. It was an incredible experience. We had Brazilian capoeira, we had a South African poet, we had Castle of Our Skins perform music from Black composers, we had Haitian couture fashion design, we had ethnic cuisine from Ethnica Catering. It was just an incredible sort of melting pot of arts and culture. Japanese taiko drumming, I could go on. But it was really rich, and we knew we wanted to do this again. It took us a little while to do it, but we are finally putting it on again. And like everything we do, we try to do the next one bigger and better. So this time we're going to be outdoors, which makes it a lot more COVID friendly. But also we get to have this incredible playground to play in at the Arnold Arboretum in the beautiful conifer section. And so you will be surrounded by nature as you enter into this event. And it will be, again, another chance for us to show just the beauty and the incredible ingenuity of the traditions that derive from our communities of color here in Boston. So we very much are happy to have you all here. A couple of things about the sort of themes around the ball and why an event like this is really so important. One of the themes is just the importance of cross-cultural exchange. Why is that important? We're going to be kind of talking about that with this panel here. And also our sort of connection with nature and how we can reestablish that connection and why that's important as well. And then sort of the third is just to sort of understand how the multiplicity of each of our identities really affect our approach and our enjoyment of art. And how art can be sort of that bridge that connects. So those are the real main sort of themes that we're going to be getting into. I'm going to sort of keep my comments short because I really want to open it up to this incredible esteemed panel that we have here. Some of the leading practitioners in their respective crafts in Boston. Also very good friends with them all. So this is great. This is like a chance for me to hang out with my friends. So I really appreciate that. And I think as opposed to me trying to introduce you all and just the incredible breadth and scope of your work, I'd rather have you all speak for yourselves. And so I would love just to get this started off with you all just introducing who you are, sort of what you do. And I guess the first question would be sort of how does your identity and your cultural upbringing sort of influence the things that you do? So whoever wants to get it started. I know that's a lot, but
We're looking at you.
Why?
You're sitting in the middle.
All right.
Oh, and
Next time not to do that.
if you
Certainly.
yes, but before you begin, I just want to make sure that your microphones are on. So just
Yes.
to make sure
Hello?
that you're okay.
Thank you.
Yes, want to make sure your voice is heard. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Oh, wow. Sounds so different. Thank you, first of all, to Castle of Our Skins and MassQ Ball. Daniel and Ashley are incredible artists and human beings. And I feel it a privilege to be able to work with them and be on this panel with other esteemed artists and you as audience. So thank you all for coming. I want to say that my work as a visual activist probably began when I was about 12 years old. I am from a Jim Crow segregated South in Jacksonville, Florida. And as I began to understand our human connections and our challenge to what was in the arena of rights, I began to be influenced by a culture of that which was identified by others rather than being identified by ourselves. And so with that challenge as a young person, I said, oh, that's not going to be happening all the time of my life. And so I began to study political science and philosophy and understand more about our world connections through a globe and a map before I began to study, and work with people in my community who had humanistic missions. And as a result, probably some of the organizations that you would know would be the Urban League and the NAACP and the youth organizations that put our mode of survival at that time in a place where the world is bigger than you. You are not that center, yet you are. And how will you negotiate? And so my life has been about the journey of being an expanded human being, caring for others, and the opportunity to have conversations about that and take in the scope through the vehicle of art after engaging now for about 30 years as a professional artist. Conversations that might not be otherwise possible because of that format. So I would say that any of the art that I do in whatever medium it is, I've been privileged to have a legacy of cloth as a medium of expression. My grandfather was a tailor. My mother followed in his footsteps and loved craft and its medium. So fiber was an introduction, and then metals and holograms became a part of that. So the cloth with light, also spoken word and poetry, became a part of the narrative of an expansive way to engage people. So all of that work sums up a one life work called Save Me From My Amnesia. And the connections and the reclamations with others across a globe. And so that gives you some idea of, and not to take up any more time from anyone else, but I find it a privilege to be a person in the world who has the opportunity to have these conversations through the power of art and serve with art as a basic human right.
Lamerche Frazier, ladies and gentlemen. This is why I'm so excited. You'll see just the heavyweights we have here. But yes, that was Lamerche Frazier, just in case you didn't know. Who would like to follow that? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'll follow. First of all, I want to echo the remarks that Lamerche made in the beginning and say thank you to the Arnold Arboretum and to Ashley and Daniel for having us be here and to have our voices be heard in this way and to make us visible, because I think that oftentimes as artists, especially here in this city, we're not always as visible as we would hope or like to be. So just really honored to be here, super honored to be like sitting next to this woman and also to Vipla as well. So thank you for that. My name is Jenny Oliver. I'm a dancer choreographer here in the city. And actually, I was just listening to a podcast recently where someone was interviewing a visual artist, Lonnie Johnson, and she was talking about her work as a social practice artist. And I said, oh my goodness, I think that's me too. So I'm still in the developing phases of what it is that I'm actually doing. I know that I create a lot of impact with people. I bring people into their bodies in a way, a meaningful way that they might not experience on a daily basis. I feel like we sit often and we're not really ever moving, and there's so much information that happens through movement and so much processing that happens through movement. And so that's really been my life journey. I've been dancing my entire life. I went to school for dance and moved to Boston in 2005. And upon moving here from New Bedford, Mass, so I'm not super far away, but upon moving here, I lived with a Haitian family. They took me in and said, you can come and live with us. And I said, okay, great. And that's really, I really started to experience Haitian culture in the home, and through that I was introduced to Haitian folkloric dance and culture in that way, and really that has like changed my life completely. I'm a Black Native person, and so my mom is Cape Verdean and my dad's Native American, so I'm have roots literally here in Massachusetts. I am a member of the Massachusetts tribe, member of the Massachusetts tribe at Punkapog, while also having lineage to the Wampanoag tribe and to the Nipmuc tribe, just because boundaries were not in the, we didn't associate with the boundaries that we have like these days, I don't think. And so there's a lot of connection that I have to nature, to being here, to place and space, but then also through my body and the body intelligence and the ways that we can communicate or download information and share that one amongst one another. So yeah, I'm also, let's see, what else am I doing? I'm also teaching a lot. So I'm on faculty at Emerson and Tufts University and Mount Holyoke College. So I spend a lot of time in the classroom with folks. I teach open adult classes. I have my own creative practice. We just actually had a performance last night. I'll be going to a rehearsal tonight, right after this. So I am fully in my body at all times of the day and night. Yeah, so I'll just pause there. Jenny.
Beautiful.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenny. Last but certainly not least.
Hello, everyone, and again, thank you.
You all hear him? Okay.
Thanks to you and Ash for creating this awesome event, and the same sentiment. It's an honor to be right next to you and Jenny, and talking about what we do and what we love. So my name is Bipla Rai. I am a native of Nepal. I was born and raised in Nepal. From American context, I am an immigrant. I moved to this country right after 9/11. So we were the first ones to take our shoes off in the airport, and we are still doing that. So just to give you a little timeline. My family is indigenous, comes from indigenous background in Nepal. We're the first people of Nepal, both on my mom and my dad's side. And my work here in the United States, so what I do is I create spaces and community spaces revolving around hospitality. So when I was growing up, I grew up in a really large family with lots of aunts and uncles and cousins coming in and out, and hospitality was like the thing that we focused on, so we could all be comfortable. So that's what I bring to the space, is bring hospitality and community, and that's what I do. My previous work has been creating Dudley Cafe in Nubian Square, and most recently I'm working with my wife Nyako, who is in the audience. My brother, friend, chef partner Kwesi, and his wife Rita. So we are creating a restaurant and a cafe coming up in July, August of this year in Upham's Corner, called Comfort Kitchen.
Yes.
Awesome, awesome. And I can speak from personal experience, having eaten at your restaurant, how incredible that fusion is. Having seen your incredible quilts, and the incredible way that light plays on your quilts, and to makes them almost like they're translucent or they're emitting light, is just amazing. And Jenny, I had the honor of being able to film you dancing recently, so it's been incredible just to see you all work and to see the spaces you create. And again, just we are very honored to have you all here. So I wanted to sort of start us off with what's great about your introductions, and thank you all for doing that, is that you're already talking about cultural exchange or cross-cultural activities, and that you all are really the products of these. And so I wanted to sort of get more into that in terms of how has the sort of many different identities that you all have within you sort of shaped your art form or your art practice.
Oh, I'd love to start.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm constantly being shaped by it. I think that, that's one thing to really be raised here in a colonial society that says, like, we're going to prescribe to you who you are. It's also been, like, very interesting for me being raised knowing that I'm Native American, but we don't ever talk about it, and like that's not really a thing that we do. It's like you just know that this thing happened, and then that's it, and not understanding like, oh, we weren't allowed to even be able to name who we are as people. And as a child, that was confusing to me, but also I was the child that was like, okay, great, I'm gonna go outside and go climb a tree then instead, or do something else. So there's that side of it. There's also the disconnect that I feel as an American person with family in Cape Verde. I don't know them. I've never been there. My grandmother's mom is the one that came here. And so in order to be here in the United States, especially at that time, is really about assimilation. It's about pushing away and pushing aside those things that make you culturally significant to yourself and your people, and really try to fall in line here so that you can survive. And so through that survival, I'm really grateful that my family has made the difficult choices that they've made in order for me to be sitting here in front of you, and also the responsibility I feel that I have as now the person that is the survivor, but also very sort of lost in the ways that I connect to culture. So I think that that's also probably why movement is such a big part of my life, because I don't always have language. I don't always, those things were like kind of robbed from us. As a matter of fact, like the tongue, like the actual Cape Verdean language, the language of the Native Americans here, like, is also gone for me. And so I don't have that. The only thing that I really have is like my physical body and how I process. And so that's really been quite influential, I think, for me, because it's allowed me to really sit and think and be with all of the confusion, and then have to make some choices for myself and say, actually, this is what I'm going to do, outside of being prescribed what I'm told to do. And as I had said earlier, when I moved here and moved with this Haitian family, it was my first real experience of like living with people that are living, I mean, they're American folks, but culturally, inside of that house is very Haitian. The grandmother was living in the home at the time. You don't speak to the grandmother in English, you're gonna speak to her in Creole, so like learning Creole was part of it. You know, eating rice and beans and chicken every single day was part of it. Going to church on Sundays, Creole church, even though I didn't really understand Creole, but that's part of it. Also, the most significant thing for me was the folkloric dancing that was happening. And so Marlene Edward was the founder of Akasial Dance Troupe. And I believe it was incorporated in 1983, so around for a very long time. And so every Friday, the entire house went to rehearsal. And so in those years that I spent with them, this is where I really started to understand the importance of movement, because in Haitian folkloric dance, I call it a physical history. The movements that they're doing are telling the history. It wasn't always as written out as it is now. And that really empowered me to say, oh, wait a minute, something clicks for me now. In that embodiment, that there is power in the physical history. And although I might not have all of the pieces that I would wish that I would have for thousands of years, you know, before me, the movements that I have right now are the start, can be the start and the continuation of this physical history of me, my family, our stories, and the stories of those people that have been lost along the way. So I think I'll pause there, but yeah.
No, I mean, such a rich answer. I mean, what really resonated with me too is using the body, and you know, science will tell us DNA will tell our histories, right? And that is a history. And for folks who have had language, have had culture taken away from them, or not being able to, you know, that is the key, right? Is the body. And certainly, you know, in my work as well with the masking, that has been a way for me to bodily talk through, you know, what's going on in me personally, but also in terms of my lineage. And yeah, I don't have a language for that. So it was perfect that I would do something without a language necessary, right? It's visual, it's color, it's all those things. So definitely appreciate and can resonate with that. Yeah. Other thoughts?
Well, I was thinking, as Jenny was talking, about a kind of similar thread that I have found through residencies globally around the world, in Taiwan and Cuba, France, Africa, Brazil. This idea of being able to embody one's message rather than it being so academic and so intellectually placed, but living the experience of your art has been the kind of connective tissue that I've found as traveling through different cultures and making or intersecting with people who I feel in their own embodiment of their own culture are whole. I think that many of us, as we move through the world, are seeking some reinforcement that we exist, Ubuntu. I exist because you exist, and that kind of back and forth dynamic becomes a part of who we are. And so, as you were reflecting about being in the Haitian family and understanding more about who they are, what they are, and taking on another culture for yourself, it reminds me of the idea that we are multicultural, or we are multi-functioning, we are multi-dynamic as human beings. And so to have to isolate like I had to for a little bit, understand that when I would say that my grandmother was Cherokee, and my grandfather's mother came from Barbados, and my father was from Florida and part Seminole, people were like, oh, what? Is that possible? Well, of course, all African Americans have some mixture, would be the posture. But what they were not understanding was that they were discounting the components of the self that they were dealing with. And that part of looking at history to help me not have that erasure was where I found the strength to be an operating, becoming human being. And so with that, my approach to my work was in the experimental vein of taking any medium that I work with to be the voice of the voice that I can speak with myself and then engage others. And so with that, I began with something that I knew was familiar, that was fiber, but then translating the language of fiber into metals, and then transferring that language into light or holograms. And so as a process in what Daniel commented about my quilts, they became this transport of light, medium, and prism to magnify a moment. I see art as document. I see art as a historical rendering of person, place, or thing happening, an event, if you will. And that it can become spatially formally presented, or it can be spatially informally presented. And so my work with community, I would say, as a spatial design and contributing to the aesthetics of community, we have this opportunity to have an informal structure with that, and to work spontaneously with other human beings, and to mirror community with our work. And I have tried to accomplish that. I'm still working on it. It's still a process. And I know it will be until I'm, some dust or something. But when we think about
Transformed.
yes, when we think about this idea of transformative practice in art, it is a privilege to be able to design with community, to have co-modeling happening as you are doing your work. And so over the past 2 years, we've had this heightened environment of building community in spite of. And resting in that creative space to make it happen anyway. And so the apparatus that we've been able to have at our disposal, Zoom, and I know you all are tired of zooming, and I'm tired of zooming, but I am very grateful for zooming because it has been an opportunity to have international conversations. It has been a place where I'm in your living room, you're in my living room. I call it Studio One.
That
And
was
then
also
my
very,
dad-
that was very awkward in the beginning.
Yes, it
It's like, oh my
was.
gosh, I'm in your house.
Yes, and the lighting. Oh, challenge. Okay, so Lamerty always use your glasses. Okay, so the idea that we have now adapted to an environment of creating as we go is a part and parcel of where the pandemic of COVID and of racism has forced us into spaces that we might not normally have done. So this ism schism kind of walk that we are now enabled to do is a part of the practice that I want to keep processing. I want to keep being innovative in.
Yes, and I actually want to return to that with several questions. Bipul, I wanted to sort of hear your thoughts as well. Yeah, and I'm actually going to ask you to speak into this microphone just because I think your voice is a little soft on the microphone.
Yep. Following up on the same question.
Yes, please.
Yep.
Do you mind?
Yeah. So for me, creating spaces and navigating spaces has been the theme in my life, and I also consider that as a privilege because my upbringing has been from my mom's side and from my dad's side. There are two different, very ethnic groups, and my dad was not accepted into my mom's family for a very long time. Just because he's from a different ethnic group, he looks different, he sounds different, and this is in Nepal. And fast forward to 2000, I come to this country, and it's from immigrant eyes, my lens, I see that it's very two-dimensional here. It's either black, white, Asian, you name another group. So it's very two-dimensional. But I think as American society, we don't recognize the complexity in people's background. And for a person like me who comes from a lot of layers of like things that has happened to me in the past, it's rather challenging when you enter into a space. But as I mentioned, it's also a privilege because I could move from one space to another without having to go through all the challenges that a normal person would have. And for us, food was a love language in our family. And I think that's what brought everyone together. And, honestly speaking, that's probably for everyone in the world. And coming to America, given my background and as an international student, as an immigrant, it's rather difficult to find a job if you're not a US citizen. And cafes and restaurants were an easy access point for a lot of us. And that's how I got into this industry, is by working in cafes and whatnot. I came to this country to study political science. 2006, I did my undergrad. 2009, I did my master's. Both the times, United States were going through a huge financial crisis. So I couldn't get a job in my field. My only safe space that really provided me financial support was restaurants and cafes. So I stuck to that industry, and fast forward, here I am, opening a restaurant that Kwesi, myself, my wife Nyako, Rita, we have envisioned this for a very long time. Back in 2015 is when we were talking about what restaurant industry was. I mean, last year, everything came up to a bubble, and people were talking about how it's the restaurant industries, the inequalities in restaurant industries. People were actually seeing it, but we've been talking about it for a long time. And quite honestly, restaurant industry wouldn't have moved until now if it wasn't for immigrant groups. And oftentimes when we talk about food and chefs, it's not the immigrants that are always put on, light. We are the one who's doing the hard work, and then you have a chef that comes in and takes away the hard work. So we're trying to flip that. We're trying to bring a different understanding to what it means to have a global cuisine. We do global comfort food, and the first thing people think in their mind when they think of comfort food is mac and cheese and a whole lot of other things. But people don't really recognize, like, rice and beans is also a comfort food for a majority part of the world. And that's what we're trying to create in Comfort Kitchen, is bringing food to community, creating a space where people are comfortable, And then just like how we are doing our event to talk about our upbringing, and I feel like the more we understand each other, the better it is for the rest of the world. And the easiest way to do it is through food.
Absolutely. I think I'm gonna kind of go off script just because of the flow of the conversation, and so I think one thing I've heard from all of you all is that you were able to have an experience where you moved into different cultures, and through that experience, that has definitely shaped your art form and enriched your art form. Cultures that may have been part of your identity, but even cultures that were not necessarily part of your identity, and I think it would be, again, because this event, this MassQ Ball, is really about bringing people from different neighborhoods, communities, cultures to come together to be with each other and celebrate each other. I think it would be really great to hear from you all. What are some of the best practices that you've found, or some ways that you feel like you've been able to enter spaces of difference and still be able to create that human connection? Like what could you maybe offer from your experience from us as we do the same thing or look to do the same thing?
I think that at the most primal level of connecting is respect. More than anything else, the idea of having the opportunity to connect with people, I keep saying that because I really feel like it's a privilege, is to have regard for another person, or something that is, or engage with something that is outside of yourself, that has integrity. It exists. The Declaration of Human Rights, on number 6, article number 6 says, you have the right to exist. So in that, kun faya kuna in Arabic means be and it is. If we approach our everyday human contact with that idea of openness and respect and honor, I hope that at some point it becomes a subconscious thing, that it's not something you have to call on and remind yourself of, or at least myself, that I'm speaking for me, remind myself to do that. That is a way of engaging the world and being mindful of there being ideas that are brought together as a whole functioning humanity, that we don't exist without each other. We really don't. And I think we can even see that in the modern day crisis that we're in right now. The lack of regard is very evident in our spaces right now. So as we build this environment of peaceful coexistence and recognition of culture, I'm reminded that I was awakened to that by the science of archaeology, actually. I'm Director of Education and Interpretation for the Museum of African American History, Boston and Nantucket. And we have collections, we have buildings, sites that are in the 18th and 19th century. And so as a result of that, you have to have archaeological digs when you're doing a restoration project. And so as the items or objects began to be offered from the archaeological excavations, there were plates and knives and forks and pencils and chalk and slates and items that were still in use today, that made me understand that this is not new, what we're doing, that people have been doing this as a continuum all the time. There were hairbrushes, there were shoes, there were things that on an everyday basis, we look at this history of African Americans as something that's like divinated out of the sky, or is suddenly alive in the civil rights era. But people have been living forever. And they have been using the same kinds of things to help them survive. So from that, I began to think larger in terms of what is history and the opportunity to see artifact and the opportunity to see the evolution or the technology advance in those things that we use for our everyday. And so with that, if we are experiencing other people and what they do, they have their stake in that. The investment is there. So, and I'm not saying things that I think are easy to do. I'm just saying things that I think are possible. So engaging even the area of possibility is an important step, I think, to understanding culture and to being open. And one of the ideas that Bipla has talked about is food. In the archaeological digs, at the bottom of swamps in places like South Carolina and other places where there was plantation life and slavery, the archaeologists have come up with the rice bowls and the medicine bowls that have been unearthed to help us understand that food practices are everywhere with everybody all the time. That is a basic need. So I think it's so brilliant that your art is food. It's about food and connecting cultures. So thank you.
Thank you.
I also want to jump in and you said the word listen, and as you said it, and I had just finished writing the word listen, because I think that in my experiences, first of all, being invited into a culture as a way of learning has been critical and crucial for me. I think that sometimes, especially as Americans, we just feel like entitled to everything. We just feel like we can show up and do whatever just because we're nice people and we have good intentions, and that's not a best practice. I think that being invited, demonstrating an interest and a desire to have an authentic relationship and not a transactional relationship, which is different and also difficult because we live in a society that was been founded on capitalism. So we actually function with this transactional mindset. So it's not a bad person or per se, but we have to bring our awareness and our mindfulness to that transactionary way of thinking and try to move away from that. Decentering yourself, the self, and the ego. Like, you don't have to come in and know all the answers. As a matter of fact, you shouldn't. You should come in open. You should come in willing to listen, not anticipating or expecting that you have something to offer in a transactionary way, but that your offering is being there to witness, to hold the space. Humility is also part of the best practices that I have. Letting go of the expectations as a way to connect with others, right? Listening, reflecting, and processing before you all of a sudden have a product or an answer or a response, right? How can you go into a space that's not a familiar one for you? And for me, I can speak about, dancing and the Haitian folkloric spaces. I had to do a lot of like, oh my goodness, Jenny, you don't really know what's going on, and that's okay. And in the beginning, it was like, oh, well, I'll fix it, or I know, oh yeah, I should do this, or it should be like this. But how do you know what it should be until you've actually spent the time reflecting, spent the time processing, spent the time listening to the feedback that people are giving you, and then separating the self and the ego from those things and saying, okay, now I can move forward with this idea, art practice, or whatever it is. But I think that especially just as Americans, in my experiences going to Haiti, I mean, it is a lot. It is a lot that we just come in so overly entitled, and we feel like we're going to save everybody, and we're not even saving ourselves. So how can we start there, I think?
Yeah, I mean, so important. And the idea of listening as a way in, and that the privilege of being invited, that privilege is so powerful, and being able to respect that, I think automatically kind of puts you in a state of mind where you kind of need to be. I think the other thing that I wanted to sort of kind of reflect on what you said, actually what all of you all said, is this experience of being a quote unquote minority in a space. I think is really important. And, you know, us as Americans, because of our colonialist expansion of the entire world culturally, we don't often feel that way. We're coming to a space as a minority, but I think that experience of being a minority is really important to have. And, you know, that automatically makes you have to listen because you don't have that power in that space, right? Like you're not the dominant culture in that space, and so you have to, you have to divert. You have to acknowledge that you need to learn from that space before you can act. And the immigrant experience is the same way, right? It's like you're entering a new country. You have to observe the laws and change yourself to make sure that you're abiding by those laws. And so I feel like for quote unquote minorities, we've had to learn those skills. I think what's really interesting in Boston is that Boston is now a majority minority city, right? Where the majority of people are people who have come from these minority experiences. And that change is going to be very dramatic in terms of how we talk about entering spaces. And so I think it's really interesting that we're talking about that. I want to make sure that we're getting some questions too from the audience and from folks online. Ash, I'm going to ask you just to keep me sort of honest here in terms of time, because I feel like we could talk forever. But I want to ask maybe one more question, and then we can kind of open it up to the audience for question and answer. I think the last question I have for you is, often when we talk about cross-cultural exchange, like you said, it's not easy, right? So what have been some difficulties that you've faced, in your own practice with this, and what have you found has been helpful to navigate those challenges?
Well, I'll talk again.
I'm going to ask to start with Bipla because I don't think you answered the last
please.
question. So if you could start with this one.
Yes.
Sure. I mean, even to this day, I was just talking to my wife Nyako yesterday about how people confuse me even before I open my mouth on who I am or what my ethnicity is. I can give you a whole laundry list of what people have thought of me. And that even translates to the work I do. At Dudley Cafe, I kid you not, I would have lots of people come up to me and ask for the owner or the manager, not knowing I was one of them, and which is fine. Same thing, especially in food spaces. For immigrants, when we lead something, the general consensus on like American consumers is like, oh, it can't be that, because we are so accustomed to like white chefs leading the way. Even right now, when we are raising funds for the restaurant, that's been one of our most challenging and humbling experiences. Here we are. All of us have masters. All of us have like 10, 15 years of experience in what we do. And I'm proud, and I believe we've done it well. But we still have to prove our worth to the person sitting across the table. And not just that, we get questioned, challenged, we get talked down on. It's a whole laundry list of things. But, going back to listening, I think that's what prepared me and my team, I guess, in many ways. When you listen, you get to know that you are not the center of the world. Mm-hmm. And this directly translates to the American politics or American foreign affairs. We haven't learned until now, because we don't listen. The whole world is on one side, and here we are with the United States leading, going just down south. Because we never listen, we don't want to listen. But if we listen, then we know we're not the center of the room. So there's a lot to say about listening and the power of listening. It keeps you humble.
I was, as you were asking that question and your answer, I thought was really significant to decentralizing yourself. That phrase, the ugly American, as we travel the globe, is still resident. I had and I was sharing this with you before, that I had a residency in Taiwan. And on my first day, I thought I could be so adventurous. And I went out into an area of the downtown section of the oldest city in Taiwan, which is Anping. And I was lost because as I looked to the street signs, there were characters. As I looked to the billboards, characters. Fortunately, a taxi cab driver had given me his card when I left the hotel because he probably anticipated my arrogance, okay? And so I was able to get someone to help me call him, because then I realized as I looked and was not able to have a developed way to be literate at those moments, I realized that there are other literacies that one can have and be open to developing. And so that idea I carried back to my crew that was there, our crew, not my crew, our crew. And there was an opportunity to have Taiwanese storytellers give us a story of the beginning of their country called The Seven Generals. And there were two Caucasian males who were artists with me. And they were like, oh, God, do we have to? Really? And I said, we do. Because I had witnessed already some decentralization, right? And so they were like, well, what are we going to do with this information when we get it? You just might listen for a minute before you engage and tell them what your American solution is to their problem and their issue. So it was this idea of the mythology that we believe is this superior space of being an American that was really broken down in that space. For me, it was like, okay. And so as a result of being there, I was able to work with students from the university, architects, and we did splendid work that was then televised. And while the other two who had been so disengaged were struggling. And so it was a real lesson in understanding how to be invited in rather than being aggressive and placing your stuff on top of what people already have figured out. You know, they've done their work. And so
I think for me, many of the challenges are sort of my own, right? Like, how do I turn off the ego, as I was saying earlier, like decentering the ego. And I think that we're indoctrinated into this through school that tells you, like, this is how to be an artist or to be a XYZ professional or whatever it is how to be a human being. And so I've often struggled with, like, the challenge of having prescribed expectations that are not my own, but that I've taken on as my own. So that's something, visibility, not seeing other people like me making work and doing things in the way that I would want to do them. A lot of times the folks that I would see that would be making work that looked like me were making the assimilated work or making work in that prescribed fashion, and something didn't feel good to me about that. So I've never really, like, gone in that direction, but I couldn't understand why I didn't want to. But I know now that it really is about that assimilation. And for me, I want to continue to connect to my intuition, right? I mean, to the point of, like, DNA being passed from one to the next to the, like, it's in me. It's already in me. Like, I don't need a degree to tell me this. I don't need someone else's validation. I don't need, you know, a museum to, like, present my thing and then I say, okay, yes, now the thing is the thing. Like, the thing is already the thing, whether you see it and understand it or not. So those have been, like, a lot of the challenges that I've faced and continue to, like, work through. And the ways that I work through that, you know, I have a deep reflective practice Movement meditation is one of those things. I have an incredible support system of friends, of family, of mentors that I can just call and be like, listen, I'm going through it. I'm having an identity crisis. And, you know, they kind of are able to hold that space for me. Also, I think something that's key that I want to share with you all is like reading. You've got to read. I think that there's so much in books. There's so much that's not in the school system, not in the things that you're going to see outside in the world, because all of this is also prescribed to us. They only want us to see what they want us to see. And so, you know, a lot of the richness is going to be in the books that we read. And so reading is really grounding. It's really grounding for me, and it helps me to like understand what my truth is and to empower me that I'm not the only one. I'm not the first one. That this is happening, this has been a system that's been designed and that it's functioning well. And like, I can also, because I see that it's a system, I can step outside of that and say, okay, it's okay for me to do my own thing. It's okay to follow my own intuition. It's okay to be a little bit different. Yeah, I'll just kind of pause there.
No, for sure, yeah. And I would like to open it up for the folks who are in the room with us. If anyone had any questions that they wanted to ask. I think we do have one question from online, but I wanted just to start with the folks here. And I'm also a teacher, and so I've been on Zooms a lot, and what I've found is leaving awkward silences often is necessary. So I'm gonna have a little bit of an awkward silence right now, just for folks to reflect. And if we do have a question, then we'll certainly take it. Yes, I'm going to. Well, yeah, I can hear you from here.
I know you can. Hi, for those that don't know who I am, everybody here knows who I am. But I'm Elaine Hall Corbin. I'm a television producer and an art and cultural publications owner. This question is actually going to be for Bibla.
Wow. On the spot.
Yes. I was at the presentation that you guys did a couple of years ago when you started working on Comfort Kitchen. My question to you is this: what made you decide to incorporate different types of cuisine into Comfort Kitchen?
Okay, so I'm going to repeat the question just for folks who are streaming and for folks in the room who may not heard. So this is Elaine, and she has a question for Bipla. And the question is, what made you decide to incorporate all these other types of cultures into your cuisine? Is that fair? Okay.
Thank you. Great question. I guess on a higher level, we want to show that we are all the same. And if you look into food history, it's actually most cultures have similar diet versus a very different diets across the globe. And at Comfort Kitchen, what we are exploring is we are presenting food that follows the spice trade from South Asia all the way to the Horn of Africa and the Caribbean islands. And if you look into that link, there's a very distinct similarity on what we eat, what we consume. It might change different depending on the reason, depending on the climate, but overall it's the same. And as we are talking about spice trade, we are also bringing the story of human migration. And with that comes the slavery system, and again with that comes the servitude system that was replacing slavery system in the Caribbeans. And there's a huge culture of South Asia and Caribbean nations in terms of people, culture, spices, so on and so forth. But our mission or our objective is to show that we are similar, more same than being different. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Yeah, it's a very poetic answer to the question through food. Just because, I mean, like, you know, yeah, the whole idea of traveling, how people travel, how people move, how people traded, right? Because, you know, the spice trade really did unite many different people from all across the globe. And that was really the first global system, was the spice trade, almost in a way. And so it's really fascinating to sort of see you take that. And I think it's also important that I think this is what you were saying earlier, Lamerchi. Like, this is what we do, like, as human beings, right? And as human beings, you can enter any space with other human beings and feel a connection. I think sometimes we lose that notion, right? That yes, we may not understand what's happening initially, but there's human action here that you are a part of innately, you know, and the same way that you appreciate your own form or tradition of that practice should be the same way you extend that to others, because it is essentially the same. Yeah. And it's that kind of dichotomy between, yeah, we are different, we are unique, but we are the same as well, right? And so sort of trying to honor both of those things at once. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Any other questions from the room?
I have a response to
Oh, yes,
that,
yes, please,
that
please.
question. In terms of looking at the commonalities and the threads of that all of us have need for basic survival needs, food, clothing, shelter, all of those have proven, like looking at artists operating in spaces of functional work with community, that those have been the most successful kind of interactions. Body movement, the kind of expectations that come from creating some type of housing or a way to survive with that. That these things in the Western canon of art is usually dealing with ornamental, or like with the Jackson Pollock painting, spots on a canvas. But when we take art into the service of humanity, that's not to negate that space for Jackson Pollock. No, I'm respectful of that. But when we talk about how our human needs supersede anything that's really for just beauty itself, that is an aesthetic, but to recognize that through the art and mastery of food, and that's taking people journeys all over the world, the spices, as you say, and looking at the art that I mainly work in, and that's cloth. We have cloth from birth to death, and it's familiar. And so working in that medium, we begin to affect people with language. You know, that weaving is a language. Tatting lace is a language, and it's reflective of where it's been tatted. If it's in Western Europe, it has certain kind of iconic language. And if it's in Eastern Europe, it has another kind of iconic language. When it was produced for the slave trade, via the slave trade and available labor. In places like Brazil, it took on another type of iconography and language of the rituals of candomblé and the Catholic Church. And so when we look at the presence of our bodies and the angles in our bodies, that art that moves and expresses through that, it's with us and it is necessary for our survival. So I think that that cross-cultural identity can be definitely mined and unearthed through the basic commonalities and similarities we have as human beings.
It's also making me think, you were talking about housing, art, community. Earlier we were talking about math.
Yeah.
And I worked with a choreographer, Reggie Wilson, a few years ago, and he was doing a whole piece that we did a phrase that was all about fractals. And so we had to do a little bit of research and found that there was this group of folks in Africa, this ethnic group of folks in Africa, which I'm forgetting which group it was, but that the whole structure of the housing was all made in fractals. Like the actual structure of the material was using fractal math to design it, and then the way that those structures that folks were living in, how they're designed within the area for housing, and then how that flow creates the circle, which depending on where you were in society, the center was, one person, and then around that was a whole other thing, but then that was also the design using fractals. And so, when we're talking about like art and community and like having those fundamental needs met, like it's been ingrained in us. It's not something that we have to kind of go to school for or do this other thing to present, but like we are actually living and embodying art all the time. Yeah. And if we even think about how we're living and functioning even in the room right now, this is also an art form that's happening organically. But yeah, when you talk, it just made me think about that and the fractals, and I always love that story because I always was like, I'm never going to use math. I'm going to count to 8 and I'm going to be done. And then we got this choreographer that said, use this math equation with movement. And like, we're going to design a whole structure and it's going to be a performance. And my mind was just blown. Anyway.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I think you both touched on something that's really interesting, and that, this part of this conversation is about art. And what we mean by art is so different depending on who's speaking, right? And sort of what I heard from you, Lamerchi, was sort of this idea that art is often from indigenous communities. Art is very much embedded in natural life. It's not a separation, right? The artifacts are not meant to be hung on walls and looked at in isolation. They're usually part of ritual. They're usually part of some sort of communal activity, and that centering in the community is so important to that art form, and that's what really gives it meaning. And what's interesting too, the difficulty is that they're often sort of relegated to sort of craft art or not true like fine art. We have this term fine art in our society, and it doesn't include those type of things. And what I heard from you, Jenny, was that if we are to study these practices, we'll start to see the complexity within them, that it is high art. If we're talking about building our whole communities around fractal structures, and what little I know about fractals is that there are patterns that repeat themselves at scale, right? So each scale, that pattern is repeated, and that is true about all natural growth, how things grow, how plants are formed. Right. We find these natural fractal systems in our world, and they're extremely complex. And who would know that if we had a better relationship with them, we might start to actually reflect that complexity in the way that we organize, and our systems may become more sustainable, may become more earth friendly, et cetera, et cetera. So there's so much that we have to learn from these things that we've relegated to almost as lower art forms that we really have to kind of reprogram our minds to. Yes, please, go ahead.
One point that I want to make in terms of what's considered art and not is oftentimes food or people in food industry, we are not considered artists at all. We are just someone that's working behind the counter, making food, and that's it. You can look at City of Boston website when they give out grants for artists. People who are in the food industry, we cannot apply for it because we are not considered artists. And I really, really hope, like moving forward, as a society, we start thinking a little outside of our box and incorporating people who've been in food industry, because it really is an art form.
Absolutely.
If you go walk behind any kitchen in the restaurant, it's intensive work being done. But yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Some
also
may argue that might be the first art form is food, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Were you
it's
gonna say
also color and presentation and
Yes.
ingredients that have this chemistry. So I fail to understand how anyone would not be able to see the honor of food as an art, or the mastery that those who have been connected to it in ways that serve us well to see. I don't understand how that cannot be equated.
Capitalism, imperialism.
Well, I think it's because we categorize everything.
Yes.
Western culture erases a lot of our participation as human beings, and it is calling now for a reparative narrative, a restorative narrative to expand for food as art and any other disciplines to be respected in those cauldrons where we haven't had that opportunity to think outside of what has been given us as this box as we go to school, and we participate in westernized, not only westernized culture, but westernized educational systems, which didn't allow for one of the areas I work in really every day is the history of Black and Indigenous people being on the planet, and the regard for, if you will, the North American continent being called Turtle Island. And that movement, and that's kind of like open a whole thing about environment and respect of like reptilian cultures that in the sea and all of that as, yeah, this is the art of the universe. And cosmology, as it has been presented by many cultures, particularly for me having studied the Dogon of Mali and looking at some of the structures that you were talking about in this fractal, but the honor of the spiral as a way of talking about evolution, it being reflected in the universe and the solar system, these concentric circles having been there. And then the checkerboard being that of life and death, male and female, bringing life on a board that would have these spaces of dark and light. I mean, all of this application of as above, so below becomes a part of this larger universe that Western culture tends to say, oh, that's ritual. Like you were saying, that's ritual. Speculative at best. Maybe we shouldn't dabble in that. We know this concrete thing here. And I think that is our missed opportunity if we abide by that to grow and to be expansive and honorable. So, yeah.
I saw you writing stuff down, Jenny. I don't know if you wanted to.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
I was writing things like, erasing as a way to monetize, right? Like we have to erase so that we can, that's what capital, like we're living in capitalism, and so it has to function. And so it can't function if it's not able to monetize, and we can't monetize if like we're allowing people to be expressive and all these other things, anyway.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I want to take a quick question from the audience online. We have a question from Lynn Duval-Luce. She asked, how would you inform your future selves about a few of the critical lessons learned from your past and present?
I can't wait to be my future self. I think she's amazing. She's going to be the best. It's going to be great. I think that what I would inform her is trust yourself. Like, it's okay to trust yourself, and it's okay if you don't have the answer to why the thing feels correct in the moment. Because I think that the things that I've gone forward with without having the concrete, like, yes, I know that this is the right decision. Once I get to the other side, I'm like, wow, that really was the right decision. And I look back and I go, okay, yes, I'm glad that I followed my intuition, but I don't always do that. I always feel like I have to like make sure that I have, I don't know, that I'm going to be policed somehow, and that I have the answer, prepared in case someone asks the question, and so that I can prove that this thing is like actually the thing, which I think has to do with like, the way that we've been educated and all of that. But I definitely would say trust what you're doing. Follow your intuition even more, because I think that there's the times that I have and the times that I continue to lean into doing that, there's just so much more richness and so much more that I discover, and I become a lot more me. And I think that that's also what you're seeing in front of you today. I don't think that she was sitting here 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So I would say trust.
I think about the phenomena of being simultaneously in all of that, in past, present, and future. that what you see right now is what you get, in other words. But the actualization of a future self, I know you all have seen like all these time capsule movies. as a way,
Back to the Future?
Back to the Future, the Time Wheel, all of that as a way of, I think, expressing that idea that, you know, we see ourselves in this time and we are thinking of it as fixed. But asking the question, is it really? Am I operating somewhere else as a future person and as a past? And so when I've had audiences with teachers and students to come to the museum, I've often asked if they had a favorite person that they would like to engage in the past or in the future, who would it be and what would they talk about and what would they envision as a space to be with themselves and that person. And it's so indicative most of the time of where they are right now. And so, you know, it's like, do I engage this space continually as an entity or being in this lineal kind of timeline? Or am I doing this as we go and developing as we go and being our, Afrofuturism has been a mark of projecting augmented realities and being the superhero that I probably would want to actualize right now, and then giving that some space in a graphic novel or a comic book. But it's still like within the spectrum of the 35 Greek tragedies that have been the storyline of Western culture. The hierarchies are still just about the same when we look at that as a collective. But as we act it out individually, we are our future, really, in my own feeling. And I could feel what you were saying as 5 years ago, it wouldn't be this, you would not have responded in the same ways today that you do now. But we don't know that.
Right.
We don't know that. So I think that that's a great question. Thank you, Lynn, for that question.
For me personally, it's been patience. I think, and again, talking about patience and time, and when you mention Afrofuturism, it's very interesting because a lot of indigenous culture right now are actually following that path.
Yes.
Because, you know, we know our past and what has happened and the present, but now we are looking towards the future and what we would like to see ourselves in, I don't know, 2-3 generations down the line. And it's very powerful because you got to imagine first for it to happen.
Yes.
And for that to happen, you got to be patient. And for you to be patient, you need time. So it's all a circle. And in my personal journey, it's, you know, patience I was a very impatient child. And even, you know, I think what pandemic has taught me is to be patient and just to be put and to be grounded. And I could speak for my team for Comfort Kitchen is, you know, two things that has carried us all the way to this point is patience and faith. And that's the only thing that we've really hung on to. And yeah, so thank you for bringing Afrofuturism into it because it really ties up all together.
And I think that actually ties everything together because this is great. I didn't even script this, but it happened naturally in terms of, you know, this projection into the future. Right? Like what do we want to see, and owning our power to make that happen together. And you know, I think it's really sort of at the core of what we want to do with the MassQ Ball is, yes, let's envision together. Let's create together. We are all artists. Our job is to create. So let's create our reality, right? And use all of our different practices, elevate them, give them space to operate, and use them to operate to build that future. And yes, we will need patience, and we will also need to trust ourselves, right? That we may not know what we're doing, but in doing it, we'll figure it out.
Right.
And so, again, I'm checking the time here. I don't know how much time we have left, but I wanted to just thank you all, first of all, for just sharing. I think that we could have this conversation every day of the year and not get to everything that we would want to.
Indeed.
But what we're hoping to do with these events is create these spaces so that we can continue this conversation, have that conversation inform the ball, right? Because the ball is almost like it is the ritual enactment of these ideas. And so, again, I want to thank you all for being here. I'm not sure if we have time for one more question. I don't think so. I think we're towards the end here. So I want to again extend you all the opportunity to visit MassQ Ball, MassQ.Ball.com. It will give you a whole list of all the other events that we're having. We're going to continue this kind of conversation in many different forms through workshops, lectures, et cetera, et cetera. So please check in with that. Thank you all again for being here, and thank you all for being here. And for those online, thank you all for tuning in. And again, please be in touch. We're going to continue this work. So thank you, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.